Welcome to the Seeing Ability Podcast, where we're having a conversation about the world of parents raising kids who have differences. First of all, we know you're busy, and thanks for tuning in. I think you're going to enjoy listening to the insights and the conversation I have with our guest today. Scott, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You bet, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we like to start out before we talk about this road less traveled, this membership club that a lot of us find ourselves in. We want to just get to know you a little bit. So, if we were to come and see you on a monthly basis, what would we find as your favorite food?
I eat enough pizza for most small countries, so I would definitely say pizza.
Can't go wrong there. What
No,
about on your playlist? What's the music you're listening to?
I'm a Bon Jovi fan. I grew up with John Bon Jovi from the 80s till today. Their
Okay.
songs are still relevant in my life, and I feel like I know those guys. And I'm a recovered alcoholic like Tico Torres, the drummer, so I just relate to all of those guys. So
Okay. And I know you're a man of faith, so living on a prayer right there.
there you go. There you
There you
go.
go. I like it. So, what about something you've been enjoying lately in the realm of a book, a movie you've seen, a streaming show, guilty pleasure you like to watch? What are you digging?
I don't spend a ton of time with TV, but
Yeah.
I do right now. I'm taking some seminary type courses. I'm not trying to be a pastor or any of that type of stuff, but as a layman, I'm able to take a course through the master's seminary out in California, and that's consuming my time. And wherever I have some reading or TV time, that's what I'm doing on my iPad or my laptop. So.
I love it. And that's probably not only learning, it's probably nurturing the soul a bit.
Yeah, I mean, every time I'm in God's Word, I'm making change. It's changing me, which changes my family, which changes everything that I do. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And then last but not least, what about a favorite place? Either you love going there already, or maybe it's a bucket list place you haven't been around the world.
yeah, I don't go to. I've had a pretty charmed life, so, early on, and so I've been all over the United States, and but the one place I haven't been that I would love to go is Augusta for the Masters. I'd love to be there on a Sunday, final round, and just be able to soak that in. That's probably the one thing I haven't done that I'd love to do.
First way to make it happen is put it in the universe. So we've done that today, Scott.
And I register to try to win tickets every year. There's a way you can, be in the lottery, and every year I sign up for it. And I won one year for a practice round, and I gave them to my parents, and they went. So I'm,
All
I'm
right,
holding out for
fantastic.
that. I'm holding out for that Sunday round. I want to get to the actual, live competition. So.
So I so appreciate you sharing your story with us. For me, this podcast is a layer of my hope is that it's a layer of the village for families who often feel a little bit isolated and a little bit overwhelmed out there traveling this path. Let's start with your backstory. How did you find yourself in this club that maybe you didn't know you'd be a part of?
Yeah, I definitely didn't know. Although there's some that would argue that my wife and I sort of made a choice, and so we
Yeah,
adopted my son. Kind of giving you the big background. I was single, never married, no kids until 39. So I blossomed late in life, and I met my wife at 39, and we got married, and we went on a honeymoon, and I came home, and I moved in with her, and I had two stepdaughters, and my wife, even a girl dog. And so I was surrounded by women immediately upon returning from my honeymoon, and then we started to foster with the intent to adopt, and we had nine different kids come through our home, and we ended up adopting my son Ridley and my son Jackson, and then we also had a biological daughter somewhere in the mix. So it looks like we have twins because my daughter Zoe and my adopted son Jackson are very close in age. They're only 3 months
yeah.
apart. But it messes everybody up when we tell them that they're 3 months apart. And then Ridley is about a year younger than both of them. And so that's kind of what it looks like, right? Three kids
Yep.
in the home, two stepdaughters out of the home, four grandkids spread between those two stepdaughters. They live in Knoxville and Chattanooga, so we're all fairly close in the in the state of Tennessee. And then most recently, I lost both of my parents. They passed away in the last year or so, and I'm pretty convinced that's why I ended up here in Middle Tennessee. Was the Lord brought me to them to spend their last few years here. And so
Yeah.
we knew when we adopted Ridley that he had an intellectual disability. They don't tell you a lot in the foster care system because of
Mhm.
HIPAA, and they don't really have a lot of information from the parents usually. But they were able to tell us, like, look, we know that, mom had it and it's genetic and it will most likely come down to Ridley and, whatever. And so we kind of knew that there was going to be developmental delays and a variety of, things. But I also feel comfortable in saying that God sort of protected me from that because if I'm no, I'm normal, I'm an engineer, I'm an introvert, and I usually study up on things and I make decisions based off of a lot of research. And I never found anything on what this was going to look like when he was 10,
Mm.
12, 15, 20 years old, right?
Yeah.
I just was like, yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't matter to me, what that might look like developmentally. He's my son, right? And I believe that because if I had seen what this looks like, if I'm just being real, it may have caused me to say no. And then I'm outside of
Yeah.
God's will and I'm not part of that bigger picture that he sees that I don't. And so we did make a decision. We're one of those families that, we knew there'd be something down the road. And even with my other son, Jackson, he came from a tough, but yeah, I think they say kids from hard places is the term that I've heard a lot. And
Yeah.
he came, I mean, his story is unique. I mean, one day when he's out there able to tell it, it involves human trafficking and it involves, a variety of different things. And so, when you look
Mm.
at the despair and when you look at some of the things that these two boys have already had to overcome
Yeah.
in their first year or two before they were in a permanent home, you feel for them. But in the same breath, I didn't realize what it was going to do to my home, to my family, to my marriage, those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So having that family with your stepdaughters and biological and two adopted foster kids, and then these extra challenges that Ridley faces, what was that like? You talked about not knowing how it's going to impact your family. That's a big theme for a lot of parents, juggling not
Yeah.
just the challenges of a kid with that's going to take extra work, but then you've got the other kid to think of, and then your marriage. Let's talk, break that down for me, unpack that. What has it been like for you guys in the recent years and then even today?
I tell people all the time, I think it took a total of 2 weeks for the honeymoon to wear off, and I already got the "You're not my real dad" from one of my stepdaughters, right? So like that
Yeah.
didn't take long, right? I courted, I got married, they sang Taylor Swift at my wedding, and then a couple weeks later it was "You're not my real dad, you can't tell me what to do," or whatever it was, right? So that wore off quickly, and then
Yeah.
and then marriage wise, I mean, things were obviously, in the romantic honeymoon phase as well, right? But obviously, anybody that has kids knows how quickly, multiple children can change that. And then there was a time, when we were fostering where, we had a closet in the house that was full of like six different size diapers because we had preemie all the way up to size whatever, three or something. And so,
Right.
there was a cycle there where it was, and my wife was awake with the kids at night to let me work. So she would wake up and do the feedings and deal with the stuff and let me sleep. And so our marriage was really clicking in the beginning, and we always had time for each other, and we made God first in everything that we were doing, and the design, the commitment to homeschooling was still there, and everything was on the up and up, as they would say, or we were cooking with gas or whatever the term was that you want to use, right? And then this is where it snuck in on us.
Hmm.
Sometimes you get a diagnosis and the doctor pulls you aside and says, "This is your new life," right? That wasn't
Hmm.
us. Um, we knew there was delays. We knew there was things, and sometimes the medical community presses you because you need diagnosis to get to certain resources. So I respect that. I'm
Sure.
grateful to the state of Tennessee, the federal waivers that are out there, the state run waivers that through the federal government that help with Ridley's resources. I'm grateful for all that. But it sort of snuck in on us because
Mhm.
we knew, and when your child's 3 years old and he hits you in the face, it's kind of funny and cute. And you just kind of grab his hand and you're like, nah, don't do that. We don't hit, and whatever. When your child's 7 and weighs 85 pounds and can get behind it and it hurts and it breaks your
Mm.
wife's nose twice, breaks your wife's nose twice in a couple of weeks or months or whatever it was, that's a different ball game,
Yeah.
And so I always tell people, imagine you've got like a 3-year-old child that would love to jump up on the couch and then jump to the chandelier and hang from it and swing and whatever. They can't do it physically because they're 3. And if they
Mhm.
tried to do it, you know, guys like me and you, we're strong enough. We just go over and stop them. We just grab them and, you silly kid, whatever. Well, now Ridley's 12 and he's 103 pounds. And
Mm.
he can hit me hard enough to take me to the ground. And I joke, I'm a former, you can't tell by looking at me, but I'm a former boxer, former Ironman triathlete, and he can do some damage if he needs to,
Yeah.
and so I can't stop that anymore. And so it got to a point, Jim, where you know I'm at work all day thinking everything's fine. My wife is bearing the brunt of trying to raise 3 kids because now my stepdaughters are out of the home, and
Mhm.
and so suddenly I'm in a place where I'm gone from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and I'm coming home and there's broken windows, there's holes in the walls, my wife is crying, sometimes she's bleeding, and now what? And
Right.
nobody prepared me. That wasn't in my premarital class at church. That wasn't in my adoption course that I had to take before I got my license to do that. That wasn't in my health insurance license test. That I didn't learn that in college. You know what I'm saying, right? There was no book, there was no manual, and I didn't know. And I'm like, well, I got to keep providing, and I got to keep. And then eventually, it got to a point where I just had to leave my job. I had to walk away, right?
Mhm.
And I'm grateful for what I do now because I can work from home and still provide for my family and be around. But there was a period of time where I, didn't work for like 4 or 5 months, had no income, lived off credit cards, and tried to keep my family going. And now, you know, strained relationships with my stepdaughters because he when he comes out to their house, things happen, and
Sure.
and things change in that dynamic, and it's scary for everybody. And then of course you know it looks like I'm a terrible husband and terrible father because of all the things that are happening in my home. And I'm the
Mhm.
chief sinner. I'm the chief executive officer too, right? And then the marriage. I mean, when you don't have time for it anymore because you're filling out applications all night and your wife is exhausted and goes to bed at 8 o'clock, and you're worn out because you still got to cut the grass and do all the things. You start to have less and less time, and you dig into the Song of Solomon, and there's a little bit of a it talks about the weeds and the it can start with a little weed, and then the next thing you know, they just take over the garden. And that's really what ours look like, to be honest
Mhm.
with you. And then there's the guilt of not having time for the other 2 kids, you know.
Right.
And then they are trying to get out of the house because of how stressful it is and how traumatic it can be for them. And then now I'm faced with, my wife is full blown PTSD. Well, how do we solve that? For the
Mhm.
longest time, I used to laugh at people that talked about that because it was reserved for combat veterans. And now they tell me when you put an MRI down of a combat veteran and a special needs parent, they look the same.
Mhm.
And you go, okay, like we weren't ready for this, Jim. We really weren't. And so I hope that answers your question as far as what that looks like for us. But
Yeah.
we are in a place today where we found a medicine, a medication through through doctors and a psychiatrist that is helping a lot. We're not out of the
Mhm.
we're probably out of the weeds maybe, but it's not the full answer quite yet. We're not done,
Right,
but it's better than it has been. But that's after trying, we tried all the things, man. Every Facebook group that you can find, every parent that suggests, hey, you ought to stand on your head and drink out of a water cup sideways and count to 10 and you know, take 7,000 milligrams of zinc or I don't know, whatever, whatever you got to do,
right.
all the things. We tried them all. And I spent too much money on all the things and whatever, because when you're looking for hope, you'll try anything to solve your problem, right? Um,
Yeah,
and and so that's where we are today. So
yeah,
it's quite a journey, and we still have a long way to go. He's 12. My other son has had some behaviors. He's 13. And we're working on some things with my wife, and just this past year, both of us had surgeries, and my wife had a cancer scare. And so, you try to self-help. They talk about you got to take care of yourself, and sometimes you can't. Um,
right.
you know, I ran into a sliding glass door one night, and next thing you know, I have a spinal cord injury.
Oh, wow.
And so just life happens, and then how do I can't tell you how many times, Jim, I've had the police here, the EMT, we take them down to Vanderbilt Children's and they do a psych eval because we just don't know what to do. And there's no place to go. There's no other, there's no hospitals you can check them into. There's no facilities that are really available. And so, there's, I guess, some people that would argue that there is. We had Ridley in an inpatient facility, and they beat him up,
Mm,
and so I had to pull him out. He had marks all over his body from where he got bit and where he got pinched and scratched, and because the bigger kids were beating him up and they didn't have enough staff to protect him. And so at some level, you just cry out and you go, now what? What am I
yeah.
supposed to do? And so it's hard.
Well, I appreciate you giving us that window, into all of that stuff going on. I know there are parents out there listening who can really relate. When you're early in that, and that first window was broken or that first hole was punched, and you're kind of like, whoa, it's kind of rocking the whole axis of your world. I guess for other parents, not like you said, not out of the woods, but in a better place today, what would be your advice? You might have had other dads or other moms come to you knowing that you're kind of an advocate in this community. What would be your advice for parents when they're really, really dealing with a lot of stress that, beyond just typical parenting stuff?
That's a great question. And the first thing I would say is don't fix the hole just yet. Don't fix the window just yet because it's going to get broken again. And so that's actually a funny story. Right now, today, because of this new medication, we've had, at the time you and I are talking, we've got about 6 months under our belt now where nothing's been too terrible, as far as like broken windows and holes. So we actually brought in a handyman who filled all the drywall back in because we had
Mhm.
a period of time where we would fill the hole and then the next day he would just punch it again, right? Part of that control and part of that impulse and whatever. That's the first thing is don't fix it just yet, and find a way to be comfortable with your house, maybe being, you know, not looking like the front cover of a magazine, right?
No
Um,
HGTV here.
yeah, exactly. Then I would say ask for some help at that
Yeah.
point, and I know that's, they might be asking help from people that mean well, but try to find somebody that's been there before and had the same experience, not just somebody who has a desire to help. And I mean medical professionals, people at your church, people in your community, other parents, school, whatever. Everybody's going to try to offer to help. I mean, we're built that way.
Sure.
Something
Yeah.
happens, hey Jim, can I bring you a meal? Can I do this? Can I do that? People want to help, and so it's great. But a lot of times they don't have the experience to know. And so there's some behavioral challenges that may be somebody specialized in behavior. If it's medicine that can help, you need to find somebody that knows what that looks like. If it's other things, then somebody that is specific in those other things. And there's 100 other things. And so try to find somebody that's been there. Try to find some support groups for me, Jim, were life saving. I got
Yeah.
plugged in around COVID. I got plugged in. It was virtual. They're not far from where you and I are in Cookville is the name of the ministry, but at the end of the day, it was virtual, so it didn't matter. And I got connected to dads all over the United States, and
Mm.
they helped me in so many ways. And these are men that I look forward to spending eternity with because they don't really even know what they did for me to sort of talk me off the ledge, if you will.
Is
Um,
that your friends at Rising Above?
that's exactly right. Exactly
Yeah.
right. And so I'm still a part of that ministry today. I will be there until the Lord calls me home because that's ultimately what keeps me going. I think my wife has found some friends that she can relate to as well. And respite is another thing.
Hmm.
Find it. There's places that you can go in your community to get it. It's probably not going to come from the waivers and the medical community or the 10 care where I am in Tennessee, 10 care and whatever, because there's just not enough people that can do it. But there's a lot of stuff in the community from get a break. There's a ministry that we use that really can go to a camp for a weekend, and I get 2 overnights. And you mentioned it earlier. I don't even know if you were aware of it, but we talked about or where I just sleep. Like people were like, "Oh, you had a respite weekend and all these other things." And I'm like, they're like, "What'd you do? What were the plans?" And I'm like, I slept in. Like I slept past 6 o'clock for the first time or whatever time. I slept till
Right.
9, on a Saturday or whatever it was. And so usually that's what I'm doing is just sleeping because there's nothing else that I would want to do with that time other than try to get some rest, give my nervous system a break. My wife, same thing. Her nervous system is just constantly stressed out, maxed out, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, those are the things I would recommend to any parent, and not necessarily in any order. Just
Right.
do those things.
No, but you kind of really artfully laid out there kind of this patchwork of like building your village, right? The medical piece, the behavioral, the support group, all the some people that have walked at least in your shoes or in similar shoes so they can kind of relate. They've got holes in their walls at home. I mean, that sounds like just reaching out to connect to that kind of very specialized community was a big part of your building that support system, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the village that I had in the courtroom the day we adopted is different than the village that I have today. And it's
Yeah.
really to no fault of anybody. It was purely just experience and life, ran its course. And so, a lot of people don't really know what to do when they're around disability, special needs.
Right.
My son is, intellectually disabled. So that's a different type of a disability for some, and they don't really know how to talk or interact, right? So that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
And so I just have chosen to surround myself with parents and organizations that embrace that are comfortable around that. And then, like you mentioned, a lot of the parents that I talk to, moms specifically, wear football helmets. You know, you talk
Hmm.
about, and when I say that, people look at me sideways. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, because the alternative is they're going to get punched in the head by their kids. And it
Right.
breaks your heart to hear it. But the
Yeah.
alternative was I can wear a football helmet and protect myself and make sure that I don't get a broken nose.
Right.
And so I'm surrounded by moms and dads that are wearing football helmets when they have to and are doing different things and have had their kids restrained and different things, all the things that we
Sure.
don't want to talk about, right? And unfortunately, that's real in our life. And so
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, that's what that village looks like, and that's what kind of goes back to that, have that in your life. Have enough people that will pour into your life. Have somebody that will come and cut the grass so that you can have 30 minutes to spend with your child. Have
Yeah.
somebody drop a meal on your front porch and not ask you what you're allergic to and just drop it off and you'll
I
pick
was
it
going to
out.
ask you, there's those people around you that aren't walking this path, but they want to help. You're from both, and what are some tips like people kind of see this and they're like, whoa, this is very specialized path he's on. What can I do? What advice would you give to those people of like, how can they help a family like yours?
Yeah, I think there's, when you look at time, talent, and treasure, right? And so, do you have a specific talent that you can do? Like maybe you're a handyman, or maybe whatever. I had a good friend do some seamstress work. She did some stuff and she handed it to me just the other day and said, it's on the house, it's on me. Thank you for what you do for Ridley. And so, can you sew something? Can you fix something in the house? Can you cut the grass? Can you change the oil, whatever, that type of stuff, of course. And then time, give a kid a ride somewhere, run an errand, do something that frees up 30 minutes or an hour for the family. It's because it's not always about the special needs child or whatever. Sometimes they just need a nap, and
Yeah,
it'd be nice if you didn't have to make a meal, or if you could spend the 30 minutes that you would normally spend making a meal with your daughter and just taught, singing and dancing or doing the fun things. Because you're in our life, it's just always work and it's always caretaking.
right.
And then, I hate to say it, but treasure, I mean, drop a gift card off so they can go out to dinner one night or so they can order pizza. For a guy like me, I would just order pizza.
Of
Uh,
course, we
but
should have known that.
but that type of thing, or maybe help with an unpaid medical bill if you have that ability, right? Some people just have too much money. I'm not there yet, so I don't have to worry about it. But some people just have too much money, and okay, go help that family, with something, and don't be afraid to just do it. I think that sometimes we get caught up in I want to do something perfectly, just the way the family wants me to help, and we don't have time for that. Just show
Right.
if the lines are crooked in my grass, I'm okay with that. You
You're
know,
saying when in doubt, just act,
just show
right?
up and
Just
just
drop
act.
that meal off on the porch. We don't care.
Exactly right. Yeah, we don't care. We're gonna see it. We all have cameras now. I mean, everybody's got the stuff, right? We're gonna see it there. Come cut the dog's fingernails or toenails, wherever come just show up one day, take the dog for a walk. I don't care, whatever. Anything that saves me 5 minutes is a blessing, and I'll take every minute of that.
Yeah. It's an interesting question when I talk with my guests about, you said that elusive concept of self-care. I'm sure with everything you've described, that was like lowest on your list, but without it, you get depleted. Where have you found yourself, even if and I think a lot of times for people, self-care sounds extreme, but it can be found in the littlest of ways. How do you empower yourself and recharge your battery?
Yeah, you're right on the button there. I mean, it's the small things. I enjoy a hot cup of coffee in the morning while everybody's still sleeping. I enjoy listening to some music, probably some Bon Jovi in my case, right? Although I throw some classical on there every now and then just to sort of try to calm me down a little bit or whatever. Um, you know, put a heating pad on my shoulders for 15 minutes to sort of take away a little bit of the stress. If I'm being real, and you can't really see my belly because of the way the screen is, but I like
Mhm.
to eat, and so a good chocolate something or other is a way that I can do that. Taking a nap is another one.
Yeah,
Maybe it is watching a TV show or a movie, just some random thing that just I don't have to think, and be able to shut my brain off. Um, Going out to eat is another thing, so I'm not stressed about the kitchen and things like that. And so those are the things that I do. I don't really get a ton of like overnight options
sure.
or whatever for that, and I don't get a ton of things during the day because I've got to cram everything in because when my son's home, our life is unfortunately, with that's all consuming. And so I've got to cram it in when the kids are asleep in the morning or when they're asleep at night. And yeah, I probably don't do as much as I should, Jim, to be honest with you. But it
Hmm.
is really important. And something I don't do, but I know a lot of people do, is journaling. And so I don't do
Yeah,
that personally, but I hear a lot of people talk about that. Maybe it's something I need to add to the mix. But at the end of the day, I think we get so caught up in our minds, and the biggest problem is what, that's 6 inches between our ears, right?
right.
And so if you don't do something to get a break there and to fill with some hope of, because I mean there's been days where I had no hope, and
Right.
I would get to the pillow and go, I don't know if I can do this tomorrow,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I would, if I'm just being honest, I don't want to go to my wife like that, and put that burden on her. So that's where I lean on my guy friends from the support group, and I, might go back and reread something that was inspiring or got me through to the next day, or try to find something that would make me laugh. That's another thing that, is a cure for a lot of things, is laughing. So, find some good comedy somewhere, and that's probably a guilty pleasure that I could add, is I listen to Michael Jr. and some other funny, clean but funny comedians, and so that kind of.
Yeah,
So.
I love that because again, it's not those big extreme like weekend away things. It's finding those bring bring you that peace and just allow you to be the best person you can for everybody. So I love all those examples you gave are great. I also earlier in our conversation, I can see two listeners out there. One that's like, I'm not the only one that wears a football helmet. I'm so glad. And then someone else is like, football helmet. Why didn't I think of that? So
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, I want to ask you a question, but we're going to take a quick break. When you have a kid who is different, all your ducks need to be in a row, especially your money. Cam Howell with Primerica knows the joys and challenges as he and his wife raise their medically fragile son, Brooks. Cam brings over 14 years of experience to help his clients be protected, have a plan for the future, reduce debt, and connect to resources. Get your financial house in order so that you can enjoy every moment with your child. Reach out today at 502 803 5075. And now back to the show. So, Scott, a lot of times I'll ask my guests if we were to bring you in, maybe a local children's hospital as a guest speaker. You're up there at the podium, and we've got parents of kids who are, let's just say, under 6 years old, lots of different diagnoses in the room, but they're all kind of in the club. They've got these extra challenges, and they wanted you to give them some kind of overarching advice on how to travel this path. Again, maybe some didn't expect, maybe some signed up for. What would be kind of like your overarching big three or four nuggets that you like to share with people that you've learned?
So I would say the things that I look back on, number one, get out ahead of it. If you've got a diagnosis or you can see that there's things or whatever, I waited. Everything I did was after the fact. It was too late, right? I was reacting instead of being proactive. Now, I like to think I'm being a little bit proactive now, but
Mm-hmm.
it was too late for everything that's happened already. And so I think that, get out in front of it, and reach for resources that might be a couple years down the road, and be ready for it, and that type of thing. I think, have a backup plan for your income,
Mm,
is huge. I was, a CEO and a vice president and leader in a variety of different, roles in my career, and all of a sudden I couldn't do that anymore, and so there are, I I think, I mean, I work from home. I'm able to be around my son when I need to be. I have a book of business that understands what I do, and nothing that I have to do, it requires me to stop the world. Everything can kind of wait if I need to, right?
mhm.
But find that if you don't have it, because going to work every day, and being gone for 8 to 10 to 12 hours may not be an option down the road. It might be now, but it might not
Right.
be down the road. And then, do your homework. When there's a lot of controversy with states and the resources that they provide, and if I'm just being real, like Tennessee is
Mhm.
way down at the bottom. I think 48 or something like that. Um, and in all fairness, the taxes are different here, right? And so you hear a lot of, boy, I wish we had this like they do out there. And boy, I wish we had this like this state has. And then we think about, well, we don't pay as much tax. So,
Right.
that state is taking your money and then giving it back to you. And so I don't want to get into all that stuff, but do your
Sure.
homework on where you live
Yeah.
and figure that out, early on, especially since you mentioned these are like 0 to 6 year old people or kids, right? You have time to react, right? And make that
Mhm.
plan. And also start building your village
Mhm.
would be way high up there on that list. Start finding people that are, I mean, I found out late that the church we were going to, I didn't ask any questions on the front end. I was just like, hey, can you handle my son? And we got in there for a couple of years, and then he wanted to talk about baptism, and they wouldn't baptize him. And I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know that up front. If I had known that up front, I never would have gone there, right? That's just, but those are the things that you don't know, you don't think about, right? So fill yourself up with, hey, I've got somebody in my family that's disabled, and this is what we need, and and if it's not helping your finances, you're going to need to fund and keep life going, or if it's not helping your family, throw it out. You don't have time for your hobbies. Now, I realize there's a little crossover there with your self-care, but
Sure.
um, you know, my days of golf and being gone for 6 hours round trip, because you play 18 holes and it takes an hour to get there, and now it's a 30-minute top golf. I eat some wings real fast and hit a couple balls and hurry up and get home before my son gets home. So this is where, and Jim, you mentioned my faith, and you know for those that don't have faith, I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you. That's just my take
Sure.
on it. And I know that's not the purpose of what we're doing today. I can only do this through the strength that the Lord gives me and what He's called me to do. There's no other way that I can do it. For the folks that
Yeah.
don't have any faith, for the single moms that only have, or the single dads, or some of them out there, I don't know how they do it. I really don't. But I will say that, at the end of the day, that's super important to understand that this is a calling and that this is something that is when somebody talks about laying their life down, laying your life down for somebody doesn't mean that you skipped your coffee trip through the drive-through this morning. That's not laying your life down for anybody, right? This is we're called to lay our lives down for our children. And so sometimes we're going to have to make sacrifices that don't feel good and that aren't comfortable and that, you go, why me? And so be prepared for that mentally that, get that out of your system as quickly as you can. And know that that's coming where those days are numbered. That's something that I would add. And then I think after that, if you're in a marriage, focus on that
Yeah.
because I think, Jim, last I checked, it was 89% of special needs marriages end in divorce. That is a astronomical number.
Right.
And my own marriage, as I've shared with you, is hanging on, because it's hard, and
Yeah.
you want to project a lot of things on your partner, and I would say if there's anything you can do to reinforce, strengthen, add to, pour into your marriage, that would be the message. Now, if you're single, because there's obviously if there's 89% of divorce, that's a lot of single, parents out there. Look for some extra help somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe, I've looked at some folks in the community. Maybe it's time to share a house with somebody. I hate to
Yeah.
say it that way. I realize that's not ideal for everybody, but maybe it's time to think about that for even for a short period of time when the years are harder. 0 to 6 isn't quite as hard as 7 to 15 or 16 maybe. And so there's different ranges and time periods that we have to get through as parents and navigate those and be ready for them.
Well, that's pretty impressive off the cuff from get ahead number one to take care of your marriage number six. You sitting in that audience years ago when Ridley was really young would have benefited from that. So Scott, thank you so much for being here. I feel like we could chat about this for a couple more hours, but I think my audience would tune us out. So I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you guys listening. We don't want to be a best kept secret. You know, other parents out there, we would love to hear their stories. And as you know, I'm doing 2 episodes a month. One is an individual or family like Scott, and one is a nonprofit doing good work. Matter of fact, he introduced me to his friends at Rising Above, and there'll be a future guest on the podcast. We talked recently, but we'd like to hear from the people you know that are really advocating out there that can become part of a family's village because of the good work they're doing somewhere in the United States. Hit me up, let me know. I'd like to share their stories on the podcast. And the best thing you can do is share this with a parent who is that person out there needing the football helmet or needing to know someone else wears one, right? Build that network and that community by letting this podcast be something they listen to because the people here get it. They're nodding their head when they're listening. They're feeling like they're part of the community. That's my ultimate goal for Seeing Ability. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Scott, for being here.
Jim, thanks for having me. I love what you're doing, and I love how the impact that you're having on the community. So keep up the great work.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.